They built empires of gold, but in the shadows, they broke human souls. Beneath the call to prayer, behind the walls of palaces, and far from the glory sung in history books, lay a hidden world of chains, cruelty, and survival. These were the stories no scribe dared write, the cries of the enslaved, the silenced testimonies of men and women torn from their homes and forced into lives of unimaginable horror under the Islamic Caliphates. But this is not just a story of suffering. It is a story of defiance, of quiet rebellion, of voices that refused to die out even when buried under centuries of oppression. And today, we bring them back not as footnotes, but as the beating heart of history. Because to understand the greatness of any empire, we must first confront its darkest truths. And in doing so, we honor those who endured, and those who fought back. This is History Memories. In the hush of centuries past, under the domes and minarets of powerful Islamic caliphates, there lay a shadow of human atrocity that history often skirts. Behind the gilded halls and scholarly courts, countless soulsmen and women, fathers and daughters were torn from their homelands, stripped of identity, and cast into lives of servitude. Imagine Yusuf, a young man who looked to the sky on a day that would become legend for its light and dread. He had been snatched from his village, his voice lost in the howling winds of the desert caravan. The caliphate's agents, clad in the authority of empire, brought him before judgment. There, in the court's silken carpets, he discovered no mercy awaited. Only the verdict: you are property now. This was no singular atrocity. It was a system propelled by ideology and expansion, where slaves labored in the sugarcane fields of Andalusia, the bustling streets of Cairo, and the opulent courts of Baghdad. Women too were taken, some stripped away as concubines, their bodies weighed down by both chains and cultural violence. Their cries, stifled behind ornate doors, became the silent pulse of a human tragedy. Some endured sexual exploitation, forced to bear children that would uphold a lineage they had no part in choosing. Yet within that horror, a spark of human spirit refused to be extinguished. In crowded sun-baked quarters, in kitchens filled with the sense of spice and sorrow, slaves whispered stories of home, of family, music, and dignity stolen. They passed these memories softly, forging unspoken ties of empathy, courage, and hope. So when they dared to plan an escape, or to teach a child their real name in spite of enforced anonymity, they were reclaiming something sacred. Even the simplest act, telling a neighbor of a birth in the old tongue, became resistance. It was here, in these hushed acts, that the seeds of resilience took root. This story, my friends, is not told for mere horror, but as testament to remember who suffered, who endured, and who fought back with nothing but their will. And in speaking of these truths of sexual violence, forced labor, broken dreams, we reclaim the power and humanity those systems tried to erase. Stay with me, because this is just the beginning of a journey through despair and courage that history would do well to illuminate. As the sun rose over the fabled cities of the caliphates, the day's labor began not for freedom or choice, but for survival. These were places where scholars debated the nature of knowledge, but slaves buckled beneath fields that produced the wealth those scholars enjoyed. In those dusty roads where sugar-rich cane grew, or in the workshop where craftsmen shaped metal with hot, unrelenting fires, slaves toiled in silence, their backs curved by oppressive legacy. Among them was Aisha, born in the highlands, brought low by the clanging of chains. She became a servant in the caliph's household, her only currency endurance, her only solace remembrance. Yet it was here, in petty rebellions, that she, like so many others, found strength. Aisha learned to hide scraps of food for a child born in secret, adopting that infant as kin even though the world told her she owned nothing. She taught that baby lullabies in the language of her mother's home, whispering of kin and tradition that colonial systems tried to sever, on nights when the moon grew big and bright. Her voice lifted soft and trembling, but defiantly, full of memory. It was through such gestures, small, almost invisible, that slaves spoke back to their masters. They claimed personhood when all was taken. Meanwhile, in the marble courts hewn from ivory and tile, some captives became eunuchs, their bodies mutilated to serve power. Violation so profound it sometimes found no words. These were people who had known freedom, and then lost everything. Yet even here, dignity flickered. A eunuch might memorize the scriptures, might guide a child of the emir into learning, and in that teaching, assert worth that no captivity could erase. This story of horror is intertwined with one of undeniable courage. The caliphate could decree ownership, could codify subjugation in law, but it could not command the soul. In whispered prayers, in clandestine storytelling, in teaching forbidden symbols and songs, the enslaved breathed legacy alive. And from that legacy came calls for justice. Ripples that centuries later would help fuel struggles for equality across lands and oceans. My voice carries their echoes, not just to recount the cruelty that was done, but to honor the fire that refused to die. So as we turn toward the final chapter of this narrative, keep that fire of resilience, of memory burning in your heart. In the quiet aftermath of empire, when caliphates waned and borders shifted, the descendants of these enslaved souls carried with them scars but also seeds. Across North Africa, the Sahel, even into Iberia, stories endured, of mothers who sang in their native tongue, of fathers who named children after ancestors, of secret ceremonies that bound the people to a past unbroken by chains. These lineages, often unacknowledged, became silent threads in the tapestry of modern Black cultures, reminding us that, even through terror, dignity persists. On dusty lands where sugarcane once bent under imperial toil, new generations now harvest grains for home and hearth, not for distant courts. They cultivate stories, too, telling the tales of those who were stolen, those who survived. These tales inform traditions, musical rhythms that echo the pulse of rebellion, spiritual practices woven from both faith and clandestine longing. Their children grow up hearing ancestral names, tales as vivid as any painting, as real as any star in the night sky. The horror endured becomes, through memory, a source of strength and inheritance of survival. And what of those who bore the unspeakable acts, the sexual violence, the forced labor, the brutal erasure of identity? We tell their stories not to wallow in trauma, but to shine a light, so none may deny their suffering, yet also may never diminish the courage they displayed. For in bearing witness, we affirm that their dignity was never lost, that their despair became determination, that their nightmares sown by empire were transformed by the resilience of spirit into foundations of pride. For my History Memories viewers, especially those drawn to Black life stories, discrimination, justice, and dignity, this story is ours. It is inheritance. It is warning, yes, but more. It is testament. So let us remember Yusuf, whose name means God increases. Let us remember Aisha, whose lullabies across centuries still warm hearts. Let us remember the unnamed countless whose resistance might have gone silent, were it not for our listening. As the candle of this episode's final moments flickers, take with you this truth, that history's worst acts do not define us, our replies do. Every whispered memory preserved, every tradition passed down, every claim to justice holds alight the flame they sought to extinguish. And so we close not with despair, but with resolve, to honor the past, to learn its lessons, and to carry forward the dignity of those who survived long after their chains were broken, but while their legacy endures.